If you're planning your first Camino, this video is for you. I'm going to give you lots and lots of planning tips coming right up. Okay, so this video is really for new pilgrims who haven't walked a Camino yet, but if you have walked before, please do watch through and share maybe some of your tips down in the comments below, because we can never get enough tips when we're planning. Why am I sharing this video? Well, I think your first Camino can be a little bit nerve-wracking in the planning stages. You kind of don't know what to expect. You're not sure if you've missed things, and so let me put your mind at rest, and I'll just cover a few of the essentials in terms of planning so that you don't get to forget anything and really chill out. There's not a lot to worry about. But I'm going to ask you a question first, and then I'm going to share 12 planning tips. And that question is, why are you planning to walk the Camino? It's not some kind of smart question. It's actually important, I think, because when you understand that, it's going to influence how you plan your Camino, and which Camino you're going to walk and which sections and so on. So have a think about why you're walking it. A lot of people are drawn to it. Maybe they've seen the movie or something like that, or read a book about it. A lot of people feel called to it. Maybe you're walking for spiritual or religious reasons. Maybe you're, like many people, walking it to just unplug and kind of reevaluate and recharge and think about your life. So it's a really important question if you're planning to walk the Camino, because it's not just a walk. As I've said many times on this channel, it's not just a hike, it's not just a walk, it's a really special journey. So think about why you're doing it. Now let's get into the planning items. I really over-plan my Caminos. So let me just mention right up front, I love the planning process. Why? Oh, look, it gives me a little bit of reassurance that I've kind of thought of everything, and that, you know, I've kind of got a plan B and all that kind of stuff. So it means I can totally chill once I'm on Camino. That's one reason I love to do the planning. The other is I just enjoy the planning process. It makes me look at the route that I'm going to walk and check out places that I might want to visit. So it's kind of getting me to research more about the different Caminos. So I really enjoy that. But the key thing about the planning, and I've said this before, once your feet hit the ground on the Camino, really hold that plan loosely. Don't sort of try and stick rigidly to a plan. It doesn't work like that. You're going to get much more out of the Camino if your plan was really just to, I guess, establish some of the parameters, the key elements of your Camino, and then you just get out there and walk. You know, it's not that hard. So let me go through those 12 key points. So first of all, time of year. People do walk the Camino all through the year. And there are some pros and cons for that. Some people love walking a winter Camino because they love the isolation. You know, they love being kind of the only pilgrim out there. The only downside, and I'm kind of tempted to try a winter one, the only downsides I can see is that a lot of the accommodation are closed, so you do have to plan a little bit more carefully and try and research which albergues and other places are open. And you're going to have to carry a little bit more gear because of the cold. And you know, you might need a few safety items. I know some people who walk winter Caminos wear those, what do they call them, road spikes or something? They're not crampons as such, but very lightweight little spike, like running spikes you can put on your footwear. So there's a few extra considerations for a winter Camino. There are very popular time windows for walking the Camino, and I think as of the time of making this, which is, what are we in, November 21, May and September seem to be really popular times. So you're obviously not walking in the cold of winter, you're not walking in the blazing heat of summer, so it's those sort of shoulder periods of spring and autumn that seem to be the most popular. But why do I mention time of year? Well, for a couple of factors. So the winter one, obviously, just take care and make sure you know what's going to be open. Also, it impacts the gear that you'll be carrying. So I tend to walk generally in sort of April, May period. So it's not cold. and I can walk with a minimal amount of gear. I layer my gear. If you're worried about specifics of gear, I'll put a link to a gear video down below where I show you exactly what I take, which wouldn't vary much depending on any time of the year, because it's all about thin layers. So for example, here I'm wearing a thin merino shirt with a very lightweight, what would you call this? Kind of a body warmer thing. And it's all about layers. If I was cold, I'd just put another shirt on, or I'd put my rain jacket on or something like that, so that don't go over the top on gear. So time of year will impact a few things like that. The other thing that you need to consider with time of year is, of course, how many people are going to be there. And if you want to not be amongst crowds, then on the more popular Caminos, those sort of May and September periods tend to be the most busy. On different, so when I say the most popular ones, I'm talking Camino Francis, Camino Portuguese. On the Via de la Plata, for example, I think the busier period is a little bit earlier in the year because it gets warmer down south, so it's sort of March, April. So do a little bit of research there if you're worried about how many people are going to be there. Maybe you want to be amongst a lot of other people. So time of year is the first thing. Second one is going to be which route you're going to walk. And if you're very new to Caminos, you might be thinking there's only one, the most popular one, which is the Camino Francis, which although there are no sort of specific start points necessarily to a lot of the Caminos, people kind of think it starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in the south of France, southern France, and then goes through the Pyrenees across northern Spain to Santiago. Yeah, look, that's the most popular one by far, but there are at least, I think, 12 or 15 other ones. So if it's your very first Camino, a lot of first-time pilgrims, I know I keep saying first Camino. Why do I keep saying that? Because so many people go back for another one and another one. So the Camino Francis, Camino Portuguese are very popular because they're popular because they're popular. They have a lot of infrastructure. So there's always places to stay and places to eat and so on. The Camino Francis is a little bit like walking from one cafe to another in places. I think the Ingles is a little bit like that, although I haven't walked it. The Norte is a little bit more remote, and then you've got Caminos like the Llana and others down south, which are more remote in the sense that the facilities are fewer and further apart. So think about which route you're going to walk. The next, because that's going to impact how you plan and the gear and all the rest of it, think about how long you're going to walk for. And this kind of comes back to why you're walking. So if it's important for you to receive a Compostela from the Pilgrims office in Santiago, which is a beautiful certificate which says, you've walked to the Camino de Santiago and it's got your name in Latin on it. If you want that, you're going to have to at least walk 100 kilometers on the final stages of any of the recognized Camino routes. So on the Camino Francis, for example, that would be generally from Starilla. So as long as you walk 100 or cycle 200 kilometers, contiguously, like in one bit, ending in Santiago, you qualify for the Compostela. If you're not worried about that, then you don't necessarily need to finish in Santiago, or you could walk different parts of different routes and so on. The reason I also mention how long you're going to walk is kind of working out your start point. So let's say you've got 2 weeks to walk. Have a think about how far you plan to walk each day, which if you've never walked a Camino is quite hard to judge, I'll give you that, unless you're a bit of a hiker. Let me just say, on average, so the average person who's not necessarily a hiker and not necessarily that fit will walk 20 to 25 kilometers a day. Fitter people, experienced hikers would be walking 25 to 30 kilometers a day, and some do even more. I tend to prefer to walk slower. It's not a race, it's not a hike, it's a pilgrimage, it's a journey of discovery. There is no rush. So I actually plan on about 20 kilometers a day. I think the average is probably 25. So work out how long you're going to be on Camino for. So maybe you can only get 2 weeks holiday. Maybe you're lucky and you can get 4 or 5 weeks. And if you want to finish in Santiago, you're just going to work backwards. So, for example, my next Camino, I'm hoping, will be the Via de la Plata. I've done a sort of detailed plan based on how much I think I'll walk each day, how many rest days I want to have. And that detailed plan, really, the sole purpose of it is to tell me how many days to allow. So I work back from Santiago. I think I've allowed 50 days for walking or something. That tells me when I need to start from Sevilla. I can then work back, what time, what day do I need to arrive in Europe, and so on. So that's the sort of planning process I go through, and having walked the Camino Frances 3 times, it's exactly the same process. So I know I walked that in about 40 days. So working backwards, I want to have a couple of days in Santiago, so that's 42 days away. It's going to take me 2 or 3 days to get to Saint Jean, where I'm starting. So how many is that? 45 days. You see, it gives me my window of time away so that I can start booking flights and things. So you might only be going for a week or 10 days, but it's the same sort of process. How long do you want to be walking for? How much time do you need at the beginning and at the end? Another thing to think about, so number 4, would be the type of accommodation that you want to use. And look, is it essential to know that up front? Not really, but it does have a little bit of an impact on the gear that you're going to take. So if you're going to be staying in albergues, for example, you're going to want something for sleeping in at night. Some people carry very lightweight sleeping bags. Some people carry lightweight quilts, that kind of thing. You can't always guarantee that you're going to be provided with blankets and things like that. And as we're coming out of COVID, I think that's going to be a lot stricter as well. So if you're staying predominantly in albergues, you need some sort of bedding to take with you. Very lightweight sleeping bags. I've got one for my next trip. I think it weighs 300 grams or something, ultra lightweight. So, you don't have to burden yourself with a huge amount of stuff. If you're planning on staying in bed and breakfast, Casa Rural, hostels, that type of thing, they're like, we've all stayed in bed and breakfasts and things. They're like little mini hotels, sort of family-run places. You're going to have bedding and towels and things like that, so you don't need to carry all of that. So the type of accommodation you're going to use does dictate a little bit about what you're going to carry with you. Even if I'm planning to stay in bed and breakfast type accommodation, I generally carry something, even if it's only a sleeping bag liner, just in case, I'm going to be in albergue type accommodation and I need something, to sleep in. And at a push, I could wear a couple of layers of clothes, sleeping bag liner, and I'll be okay for a night or 2. So the type of accommodation does influence your gear a little bit. Number 5, communications. And I think this is an important one to think about. Do you want to be in touch with people at home? I'm kind of in the middle on that. I'm in a funny situation where, not a funny situation, it's probably quite a common one, but I need to be in touch with my wife on a daily basis. So, whilst I try to unplug, I do have a quick chat with her once a day, just for a few minutes to see that everything's okay back home. So I need comms for that. I do run a business, so whilst my team are looking after the business while I'm away, it would be irresponsible if they couldn't reach me, if the place burnt down or something. Generally, I don't hear from anybody at work, which is great. And also, I like to have local communication because I might be calling a bed and breakfast to book a bed. Quite often, my Spanish is almost non-existent, I should add, but I've learned a few key phrases. And one of those is, I've got a room booked for tonight. I'm running a bit late. Please keep my room. So, it's handy to have a local phone number for all that kind of stuff and to send them emails for bookings and stuff. So think about how you're going to do your communication. Are you going to take a smartphone with you? Are you going to get a local SIM card? To date, I've always picked up a SIM card locally, but I'm going to investigate some of these virtual SIM cards, which it kind of makes sense. I haven't looked at them yet, but I presume you sign up to something online and it gives you your Spanish phone number and it somehow integrates with your existing SIM card. So have a think about whether you need to be able to communicate and how you're going to actually do that. Obviously, if you're traveling from overseas to Europe, so you don't have a European SIM card, to use your home SIM card could be phenomenally expensive. So, do investigate that a little bit. The next one, number 6, is money. How do you go with money? So yeah, I can remember my first overseas travel. We used to use traveller's checks. It's all a lot easier now, of course, isn't it? So most people would be accessing money through some sort of card. And again, depending on the route that you're walking, so if you're walking the Camino Frances or the Camino Português, you could probably excuse the pun, you could probably bank on seeing an ATM machine every couple of days. And generally what I would do is I use an ATM card with my home bank account, and I'll explain a bit how that works, and I'll draw enough cash for 2 or 3 days. So you don't want to run out. You don't want to be carrying lots of cash with you, just for security. So I always make sure I've got 2 or 3 days, and I might have another day stashed somewhere. And then if I'm passing a bank, I'll top up. A tip that I was given, which I think is a really good one, is don't use ATMs when the banks are shut, just in case your card gets eaten. So if the bank's open, you can at least go into the bank and say, help, your machine's eaten my card. Don't think I'm paranoid. I kind of go one step further, and I carry, I am going to say I'm paranoid. I have 2 ATM cards for the account, but I also have 2 accounts. So I actually have a Euro bank account back home here in Australia. I actually have 2 Euro accounts. One is my main Camino money, and then I have another account which just has a few hundred euros in it as a backup. For each account, I have 2 cards. And so it really does sound paranoid now that I'm saying it out loud. You don't need to go to that extent, I'm sure, because you've got credit cards and other things as a backup. But I just like to be able to walk without having any worry, so I know I haven't got any worry with cash because I've got everything covered. So that's one way of doing it. So that was money. Yeah, carry 2 or 3 days of cash with you, and then you can use ATM cards to top up. As of this time, cash is kind of king on the Caminos, although I suspect with contactless payments and so on, more facilities will start to take credit cards and debit cards. In the past, it was mainly cash, although I would always try to use my debit card or credit card if I could to preserve my cash. So just expect that it's probably going to be mainly cash still. Number 7, bookings. Do I need to, I've worked out I'm going to be walking for 20 days on the Camino Português. Do I need to go and book all my accommodation? No, don't. It can be a huge temptation, I know, for people who've never walked a Camino. They hear horror stories. A lot of it is urban myths, to be honest, about not being able to find a bed and sleeping in the church porch and all this kind of stuff. That is very, very, very rare. I've only heard of a couple of people that's happened to. And I'll tell you why it's very rare, because there are usually quite a range of accommodation options, obviously depending on the Camino. There's, some have a lot more facilities than others. The more remote ones won't. And I think what tends to happen when people say they've had problems getting accommodation, it's they had a problem getting the accommodation of the type that they wanted. So, maybe their budget was 10 euros a night for an albergue bed. There were no albergue beds, and they didn't want to pay 20 euros for a Casa Rural bed. I think, rather than worry about it and carry sleeping mats and extra stuff because you're worried you might have to sleep out, just have a spare 20 euros, 30 euros in your budget for that very rare occasion where, things might be booked out at your sort of budget level and you have to stay somewhere else, or you have to get a taxi to another village and back again in the morning or something like that. Just have a little emergency fund. I've never not been able to get a bed. Do I book ahead? I book one night ahead usually. I might book my first 2 nights, particularly if I'm starting in Saint-Jean, because there's a couple of bottlenecks there coming into Zubiri and places like that. It can book out quite a bit. But generally, once I'm underway, I'm booking 1 night ahead. Most people don't even do that. And I think on my next one, I'm not going to do that either, because it gives you a wonderful sense of freedom. You know, you might arrive in a fantastic place that you just feel like you want to stay here tonight, and go ahead and stay there. That's really part of the attraction of walking a Camino. It's this freedom to just kind of walk where you want and at whatever speed you want and stay where you want. And as soon as you start booking, you're constraining yourself. So I would absolutely not suggest that you book out, every night of the accommodation that you think you're going to need, for one simple reason: it doesn't work in my experience. I have met so many people walking a Camino for the first time, and they've had their accommodation booked, and they're struggling with blisters, and they're going, "Oh no, I've still got 8Ks to go because we've got this place booked." If they hadn't booked, they could have stayed in the village, where they were. And so all kinds of things will happen that make you regret and resent having made all those bookings. You might meet some fantastic people and they're all staying here, but you're staying 5Ks down the road, So do resist that urge to completely book your Camino. I tend to book one night ahead for one simple reason. And I carry a couple of injuries. I walk really slowly, and I very often arrive in villages at 4 or 5 p.m. and 2 or 3 hours behind everybody else. And so there's a greater chance of me, not being able to find accommodation. Sometimes I get in at 6 or 7 p.m. And it's just peace of mind. I'll literally in the evening, I'll sit down with a map and sort of think, where shall I head for tomorrow? And I'll pick a place and I'll ring them or email them and book a bed for the next night. I think on the next one, I'll even let go of that if I can. Just to get that added sense of freedom. So that's booking. Gear, number 8. Don't stress too much about gear. People who love the Camino and frequently walk the Camino love to talk about gear, footwear and backpacks. And the bottom line is, you don't need any special gear. You could walk the Camino with stuff that you would, go and walk in your local park in almost. Why do people tend to go and buy, let's call it special gear? For a couple of reasons. It's probably going to be a bit more comfortable for them. Ultra lightweight, fast drying gear, for example. I tend to go a bit nuts on gear. I don't carry a lot, but what I do carry tends to be, I suppose, what you'd call technical gear. So things like this little fleece. I could get a cheap fleece that would do the job, but it would weigh 3 times as much. And I'm paranoid about weight because I have bad knees and ankles and things. So I pay a little bit more to go for the sort of lighter weight, quicker drying stuff. But you don't need to. You don't need expensive gear. So I'll put a link down below to a video where I show you the sort of gear that I use, and that'll give you a little bit of a guide if you're wondering what to take. You basically need comfortable clothes to walk in, something to keep the rain off if it's going to rain, poncho, whatever, and a change of clothes, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so that's gear. Getting there, number 9. So if you live in Europe, I'm really jealous because you can probably just jump on a train and get to the start of your Camino and off you go. I'm in Sydney, Australia. It takes me 24 hours just to get to Europe. And you'll meet lots of people from North America on the Camino and from all sorts of places. Koreans, a lot of Koreans walk the Camino. And so for some of us, it's a little bit harder to get there. So get there and get back. So let me give you a couple of tips if that applies to you. Firstly, when you've decided which Camino you're going to walk, you need to think about how you're going to get to the start point. And then I call it the sort of port of entry. So for example, if I'm walking the Camino Frances and I'm going to start in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, I've really got 2 ports of entry, Madrid and Paris. And I've done both. So for example, I would fly from Sydney to Paris via Dubai, so that's 2 legs. I'd arrive in Paris. I stay a night in Paris just to get over the jet lag. And hey, who doesn't want to have a night in Paris? When Pat came with me last time, we stayed 2 nights in Paris, I think, on the way there and the way back. So it was like a little bit of a holiday in Paris on the way. I mean, Paris is an amazing place. But you know, if you have the time, stay a night. You know, there's fairly inexpensive accommodation to be had in most places. You know, get over your jet lag, sightsee a bit, and then, you know, the next day I travel down to Saint-Jean, usually on the fast train, although there was a rail strike once, so I had to change my plans at the last minute. See how plans can change. And I got a very cheap flight from Charles de Gaulle down to Biarritz. I think it cost me 50 euros or something. Yeah, the French railways do go on strike a bit. So I flew to Paris day one, probably lost a day with all the time zones. So I had a night in Paris, travelled to Saint-Jean the next day, started walking the next day. So I'd had 2 nights sleep in country, if you like, before I started walking. Madrid is another good start point. So I've used Madrid a couple of times. So again, I can fly Sydney, Dubai, Madrid. And then I think from Madrid you can get a train to Pamplona and then a bus up to Saint-Jean. Or if you're starting further along the Camino Frances, as I did once with Pat, we could get a train up to Astorga, I think it was. So yeah, think about, you know, how you're going to get there, and don't kind of just jump off a plane after having been flying for 12, 20 hours and expect that you're going to hit the ground and start walking. If you can afford the time, it's good to just, you know, get a good night's sleep, acclimatise a bit to the time zone before you get going. So that's getting there. Getting home is kind of the reverse process, although it's a little bit harder. Why? Because you're not quite sure when you're going to finish. So again, if you're in Europe, lucky you, doesn't really matter. You don't have to book your train home or your flight home. You get a cheap flight. For those of us who are flying halfway around the world, we kind of need to know when we're going to fly back. So this is again why I tend to go through this quite detailed planning process. So if I'm walking the Camino Frances, that's relatively easy for me now because I know sort of 2 days en route to get to Saint-Jean, 40 days walking, and I leave myself 2 days at the end in Santiago. I don't think I'd want to arrive in Santiago and then immediately sort of bail to head home. It's a little bit of a touristy city, but it is a nice place just to hang out for a day, probably, just to chill with other pilgrims. It's always fun seeing people coming in to the main square that you may have met on your walk, that kind of stuff. But, you know, sometimes you might be pressed for time. The airport in Santiago is really not very far from the city, so you can get out there pretty quick, and there are buses going out to the airport and so on. So if you can, a little bit of time at the end, a bit of time at the beginning gives you that flexibility. So also when I'm planning these longer Caminos, 40, 50 days, while I'm working out how many days I need for walking, so I'll average it out at say 20 Ks a day, or you might be 25, 30, I'll also put in rest days. So I think on the Via de la Plata, I've allowed 50 days all up. I think 4 of those days are probably rest days. Now I've notionally put them in my plan as being in some of the bigger, you know, historical cities. Am I likely to stop there? Maybe. Who knows? The only reason I put in rest days are that I know something could happen. I could get injured. I might need to stop walking for a day because it's happened before. You know, I might go and see a doctor or a physio and they say, look, you've got to stop. Give yourself a day off, 2 days off. And so on those longer Caminos, you know, I'll just have that little extra sort of buffer time. And I do that by just dropping in planned rest days. Okay, so that's the sort of getting there, getting back. Oh, if you're booking flights, yeah, look, flights are a tricky one. I tend to book, I think what you call in the States an open jaw ticket. Maybe it's not even that, but sometimes I'm flying out from a different city that I flew into. So I might fly into Paris and fly out of Madrid. The other thing I'll generally do, and it can be a bit more expensive, is I'll make sure that my homebound flight is a flight that I can change the dates on. The other thing that I would suggest is that as you are coming towards the end of your Camino, you know, depending how long it is, keep an eye out on what date you think you're going to arrive in Santiago, and you know, whenever your return flight is. And on my very first Camino, what I did is I skipped a day before Camino, before Sarria. Obviously, don't skip a day. If you want the Compostela, don't skip a day on the final 100 kilometers if you're walking, 200 if you're on a bike. But what I did, I actually skipped the day just prior to Sarria, just to make sure that I would arrive in time and still make my flight. There was a bit of an issue on that one because I was pretty injured and I was down to 10 Ks a day, I think. So yeah, that's the flights to and from. Number 11, insurance. Why would you need insurance? For a couple of reasons. I always tend to have travel insurance. One element of that is for property. Look, it's very, very rare, but there have been thefts on the Camino. I have heard of people having their packs stolen and things like that, but very, very rare. I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's probably more likely that your luggage will get lost on the way to the Camino. You might have to buy some more. But the main reason I have insurance is for health insurance. Now, let me say a couple of things about the health services in Spain. Firstly, they are phenomenally good. And I would hesitate to say, no, I'm not going to hesitate to say. I reckon actually the health services in Spain are probably better than here in Australia. I've had to see a few doctors and physios and people like that. I've had a couple of hospital visits during my various Caminos. Don't think for a minute that the Camino is hazardous to your health. I'm just not in the best of health. Yeah, every time I had to go and see a health professional, they were absolutely superb. Why do you need health insurance? Well, it's what health insurance is for, isn't it? What if something major happened? What if you had to be casevaced home, flown home or something? I think for the small cost involved in health insurance, it's worth it. What if you got run over and broke both legs and, they had to stretcher you back to the States or something? Those sort of flights are phenomenally expensive. It might be worth a couple of $100 of health insurance. Yeah, as well as being really great, the health services in Spain are of incredibly good value as well, a lot cheaper than here in Australia. So I probably shouldn't say this, and please don't expect this. Please don't. But occasionally you might go to a health centre in a small country town or something, and they're going to fix a blister for you or whatever, and you'll go, how much? And they go, don't worry. They are such nice people. That's happened to me a couple of times where I've had to pay something. It was incredibly cheap. Or I've heard other people sort of say that they'll give you a bill or they'll send you a bill or something like that. Don't stress over it. They're amazingly good value, and don't expect free healthcare. But when you do come across it, it's just a nice bonus. What was the other point I was going to make on healthcare? No, I think that was it. That was the insurance. Related to healthcare is medications. So if, like me, you're on prescription medications, you have a couple of options, maybe only one. I tend to take my medications with me. So I'm on a couple of different medications, one for stomach acid and one for cholesterol. And I actually take enough with me to last the whole Camino. They're very small tablets, very lightweight. So I'd much rather not have the worry of trying to top up while I'm walking. Things like painkillers and stuff you can buy anywhere. Pharmacies are great in Spain, but I'm talking about prescription medication. So either you could take it all with you, which I think is the best thing to do. The other thing that I do is I photograph my prescription so that I could show a doctor if I had to. I've never had to do that. I'm not quite sure how they go with a prescription from another country. I don't think a pharmacy would issue drugs based on a foreign prescription, but you'd probably have to go and see a doctor and say, look, I'm on these. Can you give me a local prescription? So if you can carry them, then far easier. Obviously, if it's like a 3 kilo box, then that's not practical. But mine are very lightweight. The other tip with medications, what I do, and I do this for, I carry a small supply of painkillers and things as well, just to get me in over the first few days until I see a pharmacy, because I need those. Might go into all of that. What I also do is my medications I put in a little dry sack in my bag, and they're all in their proper packets with the labels from the pharmacies on them, with my name, the doctor's name, all the rest of it, so that if anybody checks them, you know, at security or airports or whatever, they can see that, you know, these are legitimate. When I start my Camino, I take them all out of those packets and throw the packets away. So I've just got them in their little blister packs. It just saves a bit of space and saves weight. But I don't do that until I get there, because people are going, "Oh, what's this?" And you know, all sorts of things. So that's insurance and medications. I think that's probably it. So I went through 12 things there. Now, if you are planning your first Camino, can I just make one plea? Don't stress over it. You know, "Oh, Rob's told me I've got to look at this and look at that." No. I'm just mentioning a dozen things that you might want to think about. Maybe they have no relevance to you because, you know, you're not sort of traveling long distances and you're not on medications or whatever. I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of a checklist of things to think about. And, you know, if half of them don't even apply to you, that's great. You might think, "Oh, I forgot about that," which is great, because I would hate for you to sort of get there and go, "Darn, I forgot, you know, to bring my medication, or I didn't get a local SIM card or something." So I just wanted to share these really to give you a few things to think about, so that you can plan ahead, and when you get there, just really enjoy your Camino without stressing about stuff. That's what it's all about. Now, for those who've walked many more Caminos than I have, and there's lots of you watching, I know, what else would you add to the planning process? And let's not stress out the new pilgrims. Let's try and sort of keep it to the essentials. Love to hear your comments down below. And I better stop rambling on, because this video has gone way longer than I planned it to go. And Pat is telling me that lunch is ready, which is very important, because I've got half a bottle of Spanish Rioja to go with lunch. So see you later.